This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
What's up, guys? Welcome inside the paint as I was trying to fix my... Sorry to do this here, but it was all of a sudden cutting off my head. There, that should be a little bit better. Inside the paint here, you guys are already dropping some great comments, great questions there in the chat. So, Ira, I felt like last week, and understandably so, because of everything that was going on with the Dolphins, I had to filter through 30 Dolphins comments and questions in the chats before I would get to one Heat comment. And look, again, understandably so, that was an unbelievable week for all sorts of different reasons if you're a Dolphins fan. But it really feels like, even though Mike McDaniel named the head coach of the Dolphins the other day, these next 24, 36 hours as we get up to the NBA trade deadline and then the aftermath of it, and then now we're looking at the Miami Heat team that's in first place in the Eastern Conference. This is Heat time now. We're really getting to the point of the season where we're
except that the Dolphins are having their press conference tomorrow, which couldn't be worse timing.
Were we supposed to tell people that? I was kind of I wasn't sure if we were allowed to let the,
well, you know what?
day out.
I'm not an official Dolphins writer person, so I don't have to say anything. Honestly, the way the timing came down, I almost thought Big O was going to tell us we're going to have to be preempted today because there was a lot of thought that the Dolphins might do their introductory press conference today. But I think it would be wild, Clay, if the Dolphins are having their press conference tomorrow for their new coach, how I know everyone in town will be down there. And the Heat make a trade, and all of a sudden you're interviewing this new face of the franchise of the Dolphins, and everyone's looking down at their phones. Oh my God, they made that trade. What do we do now? So if the Dolphins are holding their press conference, which they might announce later in the day for tomorrow at 10 a.m., I think it's going to be really interesting sort of day going on as far as balancing the two things. I mean, I really thought, I'll be honest with you, just like I spoke about about how we do the show, I always plan ahead, as you do for your budgeting for Local 10 Sports. What should we do? Should there be a certain package? And I left everything clear this week because I realized the Dolphins are going to have their moment. Naming a coach is huge. And as a matter of fact, to preempt all your pre-planning, just to talk for a second about this, that's what's made my job so much easier than Omar Kelly and Barry Jackson and those who cover the Dolphins for this reason. When the Heat change coach, they simply have the next guy already in the room. I don't remember matter of fact, the last time there's been a Heat coaching search was when Ron Rothstein was replaced by Kevin Lockery. Otherwise, it's been, hey, Pat Riley, I'm stepping down. Stan Van Gundy's taking over, my right-hand man. Oh, Stan, I'm going to spend time with my family. Here's Pat Riley coming back in. Oh, Pat Riley, I'm stepping aside. Here's Eric Spoelstra. There hasn't been a search. There's literally been a guy standing to the left or to the right who's just moved in. And I'm appreciative of that because I'm sure what you went through and Will Manso, everyone at Local 10, the whole coaching search, this guy's for real. This guy's coming in. There's the helicopters are above. We caught this guy landing. I am so glad not to be part of that and that I just to get talk sports with the Heat. And honestly, I hate to use the word small C with me, but their ongoing culture has made it so much easier.
Yeah, I could spend the next hour talking to you guys about watching the plane in the hangar on what even day was it? Was it Monday? I think it was Monday when we were kind of trying to figure out what plane Mike McDaniel was going on. But it's a great point. We don't have to deal with that with the Heat. So we're going to talk Heat now. We're going to talk about the trade deadline coming up tomorrow and the fact that there are some names circling for the Heat, and there are a few names that I'm interested in. I want to get your take on. But guys, as always, drop your questions in the chat. Any names that you may have. Russell Westbrook is a hot mess in LA. Scummy always makes great points. Scummy says Clay looks like a young Jim Carrey in the movie Once Bitten. What do you think?
You know what? I see him more as a pet detective, but I actually see no critters running around now, so I'll just leave it at that.
I just think it's funny that Once Bitten, I think, wasn't Jim Carrey in his 20s back then? I'm old, man. I'm 42. My knee is swollen. I can't exercise like I used to, man. So I appreciate that though, because it kind of takes me back.
I got to tell you though, when it comes to NBA comparisons to Jim Carrey, Rick Carlisle blows me away every time I see him. It's it's just it's almost uncanny. And he has those facial contortions also, like Jim Carrey does. That's the one. There were only a few people when people go to me, oh man, he looks like that guy. You know how it is, Clay. Sometimes you see it or you don't see it. But Rick Carlisle is Jim Carrey. And even Jim Carrey is not as Jim Carrey as Rick Carlisle is. But I digress.
So as we head towards Thursday, and the Heat are in a really they're in a great spot where
Yes.
I remember every year with the Heat since I've been here in many ways. It's all right. Who's the next guy that the Heat need to get in order to get to that spot? And even the year that they went to the NBA Finals, everything was crazy because of COVID, and we hadn't quite gotten to that point yet, but you still felt like the Heat had a team that they were good enough to get there, and they went out and they got Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder, and they ended up making the day. I don't know that this team needs somebody to get there, but there are some names circling. And one that's kind of come up over the last 24 to 48 hours I want to get your take on is PJ Washington with the Charlotte Hornets. And, I think you're looking at we saw him play the other night, and you can see what he can bring to the table, but I'm not sure he quite fits anymore what Charlotte is trying to do. Is that the type of player that, especially with all the questions surrounding Markieff Morris, is that more the type of player that you're looking at from a Heat perspective at adding at the deadline as opposed to a potential star?
I love PJ Washington. When I was in the Chicago at the draft combine, I was there with David Wilson from the Herald. We actually talked to Tyler Hero at one table. PJ was at the next, and there was sort of a back and forth, who's the better player. But I don't understand what the Heat could possibly have that Charlotte would want for PJ Washington if he's being shopped. And again, that's just a name being thrown out there. And while you might not fit today, teams change, they morph, things happen in the offseason. Do I like the name? Yes. The Heat do not have draft capital to offer. They do not have a young player in return. They're certainly not trading Tyler Hero for PJ Washington. So they're sort of the names that I know are out there because teams want to get rid of someone, and the names that might be out there. I almost would look not as severely as a PJ Washington trade by Charlotte. It's almost similar to Tyrese Halliburton and the Kings. When you get a young, I want to get into that for sure.
Why? What is Sacramento? We got a lot of time to talk about that.
When you get a young developmental talent, you don't pull the plug that early unless two things. You think he's maxed out. This is the best he's going to be, even at 23. Or you simply have such a good offer that you have to do it. The example would be Precious Achiuwa. Had a nice rookie season for the Heat last season. Is having a nice season this year for the Raptors. Is going to the rookie challenge. But the Heat had a chance to get Kyle Lowry. And when you have a chance to get Kyle Lowry, you pull the plug. So you pull the trigger. So if Charlotte is going to offer PJ Washington, it has to be for someone that absolutely captures their imagination. Well, we know, and we'll get into this further in the show, the Heat are not trading Bam Adebayo. They're not trading Jimmy Butler. They're not trading Kyle Lowry. They're not trading Tyler Hero. So if you're saying to me, would Charlotte take Duncan Robinson, for example, and work a trade around that? I guess you could see that. I guess you could say that would add more three-point shooting. But they have Gordon Hayward under this huge long-term contract when he left Boston, so it doesn't make sense. Interesting name, yes. But Clay, and please keep giving me names. I can give you 50 names who were interesting, but then I throw it back to you. But give me a deal that makes sense for the other side. Okay, if the Heat can trade KZ Okpala for PJ Washington, I'm all for it. Go ahead and make the move. And then I want to see how soon Charlotte fires their GM. So you have to give something tangible to get something tangible.
Yeah, and so look, and this question was asked in the chat as well. It's if you're going to look at names like that, then you might be looking at some of the younger players that maybe you're not necessarily ready to give up on. I think your point about Precious Achiuwa is a good one, because I think there are probably a lot of Heat fans right now, and again, this is a name that was mentioned, that are looking at Omer Yurtseven as somebody who has long-range potential. Now, I don't know that you would necessarily say that the potential is similar to Precious Achiuwa, but that's the type of player that I think some Heat fans have started to really warm up to, that in the past, and again, I'm not comparing him to a Caron Butler, but when you look back at big trades the Heat have made in the past, it hurts, man. Like getting rid of a young player in order to bring somebody in that helps you now, it's usually going to be a young player that hurts to give up. So you're not going to give up a KZ Okpala in that sort of a situation. But if you're looking at adding somebody that you think is going to make you a championship team this year, you're not just going to give away your stuff that you're ready to get rid of anyway, and an extra second round pick in 2075. Like it's going to be something that hurts.
You mentioned a really good name, because I spoke to some people around the Heat yesterday about Yurtseven, and I could see there would be interest there because he is that lump of clay that you can mold into something, and he's had his moments. but he's on such a good contract. He's, he's minimal contract next year. Then the Heat have his rights after that. Who's to say Dwayne Dedmon definitively stays or agrees to stay at the minimum? Who's to say PJ Tucker doesn't use his opt-out, get that one final big deal of his contract? The over 38 rule plays in with him because he's 36 right now. Who's to say Markieff Morris ever plays, number one, NBA basketball again or efficient NBA basketball again? So while the power rotation seems to be healthy and robust at the moment, you do have to look to the future. The other thing you brought up, and I thought was a very good point, is this. You talked about maybe a PJ Washington as part of a future piece. He's a young player, 23, 24 years old. And this is something we'll get into later in the show here on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show. And it's this. Like we mentioned with PJ Tucker, he's 36. Kyle Lowry's 35. Jimmy Butler's about to turn 33. This is a live-in-the-moment team. This isn't a team that can afford to give up anything that helps now in the rotation and say, oh, but 2 or 3 years from now, he can really help us. Because I would be pissed if I was PJ Tucker, if I was Kyle Lowry. Like, come on, man. I came here to win or at least compete for a title. I'm older in NBA years. You promised me, Pat Riley, we would be living in the moment. So I don't see that kind of trade. But if I could hold on to an asset in my back pocket, like a Omer Yurtseven, knowing that he's not hurting me against the cap, he's not hurting me against the tax, and I can plan for the future, I can quietly do that also. Omar's a fascinating name. Would you attach Omer, KZ Okpala, which we all agree they'd rather have the roster spot, and Markieff Morris's contract so you can get to that maybe $10 million player or so to add another contributing roster player right now? It's an interesting notion to think about, and I think that's something that other teams will come at the Heat with.
And so I think you got to make that distinction. It's, look, we can throw out all sorts of names, and I think PJ Washington is a really good example of that, in that he's a good player who's going to appeal to a lot of teams. I'm not sure. I feel like the style that Charlotte plays, he may be more palatable. He may be more appealing to another team than he is to Charlotte right now. Just again, Charlotte plays this frenetic style.
Yes.
And now you watch him play defense and you're like, okay, I see how he can fit on Miami defensively right now. But it's not just Miami. There are a lot of other teams that are looking at PJ Washington. And so you're looking at, okay, what are the Heat going to have to give up in order to trump another team's offer? Because nobody's going to do Miami any favors. No, teams are going to do themselves favors. So that's where Omer Yurtseven comes in. And the Heat are going to have to ask themselves, are we willing to part with somebody who checks all the boxes that Ira just mentioned? Somebody who is this mold of clay, somebody who has a fantastic attitude. Like you talk about Heat culture, Heat culture is about coming in and being willing to put in the work. Omer Yurtseven's already proven that. Well, other teams are going to know that as well. So that's what's going to make him appealing to other teams. Are you willing to part with that for a player that's going to help you right now? And again, PJ Washington helps you later too. But that's what you have to ask yourself if you're a Heat fan. Is player X worth giving up something that hurts? And in this case, someone that's going to hurt, because I think Omer Yurtseven has really endeared himself to Heat fans.
And that's why I'm sort of floating one-year answers and older names. The name I floated at the Sun Sentinel was Thaddeus Young. He's not playing in San Antonio. The Spurs aren't going anywhere. If he doesn't get traded, he very well might get bought out because the Spurs do right by their people. There's a guy, older guy, but for the rest of this season, if Markieff Morris can't play, if PJ Tucker is injured or in foul trouble, you have that veteran presence, been there, seen that, done it, can make the three-pointer, but won't cost you much of anything, if anything, if he hits the buyout market. So that's why, like, I'm looking at names that I'm sure that Heat fan out there, are saying, well, that's not a sexy name. That doesn't do anything for me. The Heat, like Clay right now, have plenty of sexy going on anyway. They're fine. They have Adebayo. They have Butler. They have Kyle Lowry. They have their sexy names. No one's coming in here, Clay, to be a top 3 Heat player. Arguably, the way Tyler Hero is playing, no one's coming in here to be a top 4 Heat player. So I am going to the rest of the show, probably bore some of the listeners with names where they go, really, Ira? Is that all you got? Clay, you could throw out the pie in the sky. I don't want to mess with a good thing.
No, and see, I think that's where we're in this good spot. And this goes back to what we said at the top of the show. It's like every year, the reason why you're fishing for something bigger is because deep down you're not there yet. And again, the year they made the NBA Finals, I don't even know that when they made the trade, and I'm a huge Jay Crowder fan. I always have. I actually thought at the time that was going to be the bigger part of that trade, as much as everybody loved Andre Iguodala. I've been a huge Crowder fan for a long time, but I didn't even think that deal was a man that puts this team in the NBA Finals. That team. It was just everything came together, and this has nothing to do with being in the bubble. This was that team came together in a way that like coaches dream of. And but in the moment, you didn't look at that and say, okay, those two players instantly make this team an NBA Finals team, especially when you're looking at Boston and Toronto and other teams in the East at that point. With Miami now, I feel like you're already there. You're essentially safeguarding against foul trouble. You're safeguarding against injury. So you're not looking at the big fish because you already got all the big fish that you need, but you need to get to the finish line, and you need to find ways to spell your guys. You need to find ways that, when you get to the playoffs and somebody gets a hamstring, somebody twists an ankle, that's the type of player that you're looking for right now. So you're not gonna hear the names like Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, who's now hurt, Ben Simmons, James Harden. I mean, we're gonna get to all those names later because I think those will directly impact the Heat as those moves are made. But from a Heat perspective, it's the boring names.
And I want to maybe, like, as you go through the chat, maybe we'll just have a lightning round at the end and you just throw names at us, and we'll do that also. So anyone who wants to text in just with the name and keep it simple, we'll hit that at some point. There are two things that, as we've been doing this show now, the Inside the Paint for several months, we've said we wanted to know as we got to the trading deadline, which is tomorrow, 3 p.m. What did the Heat look like when they're whole? Well, Kyle Lowry came back last week against San Antonio. The Heat are 3-0 since he came back with their preferred starting lineup. They've obliterated. They've led by at least 26 points in each of the games against the Spurs and the Hornets and the Wizards. And I know that's not great competition, but it was on the road, so it is meaningful. And I just posted a story at sunsentinel.com about how Bam Adebayo said, now that this starting lineup has picked up where they left off on November 27th, the last time they had been whole, he realizes how good a starting lineup is. So we did get to one thing we wanted to. We checked one box. Yep. The Heat have gotten whole by the deadline. We know if you do nothing, they are right there with anyone. But box number 2 didn't. And I got to be honest, I have been slow playing this. And Clay has been prodding and asking the kind of questions I ask Eric Spoelstra to try to get an answer where I keep going, no update. We did not get the Victor Oladipo sighting I would like to have seen. So we will go into the Miami Heat trading deadline not knowing if Victor Oladipo is the final piece, not knowing if he's going to play this season. I assume he is, but you got to admit, Clay, first we said maybe January, and then we said mid-season, which was mid-January, and then we said, okay, by the trading deadline, and that Vic is traveling with the Heat right now. He'll be with the team tomorrow in New Orleans, but that's the unknown. And as everyone has pointed out, this is not necessarily unique to our show here, that you probably can't do better at the trading deadline than adding Victor Oladipo. So it might be a move at the 2021 trading deadline that pays the biggest dividends for the Heat at the 22. But I would like to have seen Victor Oladipo because Clay, as good as it was when he came in last season, played the 5 games. He looked really good. Then he went up for that dunk. He was never the same. And if the Heat are only going to get 5 more games out of Victor Oladipo, then that is a concern.
And this is the give and the take, right? It's you and I would have loved to see Victor Oladipo before the trade deadline. Those guys that matter, that are making the decision, they're seeing Victor Oladipo on a day in, day out basis. And from what we've been able to gather, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong as we go to break here, but I think the feeling is, and you mentioned this last week, that you had Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra and Andy Ellisberg, and I think you even said Jimmy Butler came out and watched Victor Oladipo's workout. That it's like everybody, it's like it feels like it's getting close, but I almost feel like because they know what he is going to be, they know who he can be when he's healthy. I feel like they're being extra cautious. Now, we'd love to see it, but it almost feels like behind the scenes, they're like, you know what? We don't need him yet. Why are we going to push this when we don't need him yet? And we see what this lineup is doing that's out there. So we're going to talk a lot more about Victor Oladipo, but I want to talk about the moves that are being made around the league and the moves that are kind of lingering out there and what kind of impact they could have on the Heat, because there are some big names that could be changing teams between now and 3 o'clock tomorrow in these next, doing the math here, 5 plus 29 hours. It's going to be crazy. We're going to talk about that next right here on Inside the Paint.
O show.